So to begin, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming our presenters for this session, Jeffrey Butler, Lawrence Talley, and Jay Smith. Jeff, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Salima. Well, I'm Jeff Butler. I'm a regional practice director for risk and compliance for Jefferson Wells. I have actually been with Jefferson Wells for a little over 9 years. And prior to that, I was the chief audit executive for a large technology company. And before that, I was executive director for a large public accounting firm in their risk governance and compliance practice. Lawrence?
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Hello, everyone. My name is Lawrence Talley. I'm a risk management and internal audit professional with over 25 years of experience in various internal audit functions. I currently serve as the director of Jefferson Wells Risk and Compliance Practice in Ohio. I began my career, the crux of my career was at Ernst & Young in their risk advisory practice. And currently, I'm working by serving clients and standing up internal audit departments. I focus on executing a variety of internal audit and compliance programs. I perform enterprise, internal audit, and risk assessments. But much of my professional effort has really been spent focused on developing and executing technology and database solutions for internal audit, compliance, and risk management functions. So it's certainly a pleasure to be here with you all virtually, and I look forward to sharing my thoughts and experience on data analytics for internal audit. So, and we appreciate your participation. And with that, I'm happy to be joined by my colleague, Jay Smith. Jay, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lawrence. My name is Jay Smith. I'm a regional practice director of finance and accounting, as well as specializing in data analytics for Jefferson Wells for the South Central region. My background is in the area of finance and accounting, and more recently in data analytics. My career has spanned from investment banking to corporate enterprise type of work, as well as being a controller and a past CFO. So with that, I think we're ready to kick off our program. So our agenda for today, first off, it is a packed agenda. We've got a lot of great information to share with you all today. So we're going to first start talking about the importance of assessing the quality and security of data. After that, we're going to talk about overcoming common challenges that folks encounter when using data analytics, switching then to the approach of data analytics, along with detailed phases and key roles and responsibilities, how data analytics can enhance your audits, types of audits that may benefit from data analytics, and best practices for achieving success. So the first question we have to ask is, what is data analytics and why do we use it? So a definition of data analytics, as you can read there, is it's the process of inspecting, cleaning, transforming, and modeling data with the goal of highlighting useful information, suggesting conclusions, and supporting decision-making. There's a lot there, but let's just run down a couple of the key points. Data analytics is a problem-solving process. We are taking data in order to get information out of it. It's going to help us extract insights. And depending on what kind of data analytics approach we take, it can either be historical, real-time, or predictive, looking into the future. So data analytics can be both risk-focused, dealing with controls effectiveness, fraud, waste, et cetera, or performance-focused. And we're going to get more into that later on in this session. So types of data analytics. So when we look at a spectrum of data analytics, say from the simplest form to the most complex form, we start off with descriptive analytics. This is a snapshot looking back as to what happened in the past. Okay, so this is only from the present point looking back, and it really helps us start to gain a view to what might happen in the future. So once we have determined what has happened, the next phase is the diagnostic analytics, and that really is trying to answer the question, why something happened, okay? This is helping us piece together parts of that analytics project to develop deeper insights and understand both the cause and the effect of why something happens. And this becomes valuable because it starts to allow us to have drill down capabilities in the dependencies and to start identifying patterns. From there, we go to predictive analytics. So now we have the what happened in the past, why did that happen? And now we take those and we apply it to what might happen in the future. It helps us to start detecting tendencies, clusters, and expectations, and really predicts what is likely to happen as we move forward. Now, this one is a little more complex. It requires more data, and it requires some more time. And we're going to get into some of that here in just a little bit. But the last and probably the most complex type of analytics is the prescriptive analytics. And this really is taking the what happened, why it happened, what might happen, and really using this part to simulate and optimize and to really suggest maybe some new paths going forward. It's going to give us some decision options to mitigate risk or take advantage of a trend. And it's very process intensive and typically requires the most complex tools and technology. So when we look at the data analytics maturity, the first step or the first part here is kind of the ad hoc, right? These are the analytics that is a one-use process. It's the initial investigation to determine what actually happened. And from there, we decide, okay, well, this is worthwhile looking into a little bit further. So in order to make this an ongoing part of my process, I want to make this repeatable. So at that point, this turns into a predefined, scripted performance measure that repeatedly tests on similar data on a scheduled basis. Once we determine that that is worthwhile for our organization, then we decide to centralize it. That really means further development, storage, and operations of the analytics in a central repository. So it's always within arm's reach, if you will. And after that is continuous monitoring. And this is the highest point of the data analytics maturity model. And really what this is taking those data analytics models and really putting them into a fully automated model running at scheduled intervals with embedded into production systems, including notifications, workflows, remediation, tracking, and dashboards. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lawrence.
Actually, I believe Jeff is going to cover this for us.
That's okay. Okay. Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks, Jay.
Of course.
So why is data analytics important to internal audit? Well, we have company expectations and regulatory expectations, and some of the enhancements are around the audit coverage, quality, business impact, stronger assurance. As we look at this, it helps with the planning process, like risk profiling, statistical sampling, even testing entire data sets, which helps alleviate the potential for errors of not examining an entire data set. So it gives us some options there. And as far as audit execution, continuous controls monitoring, fraud indicators, predictive risk identification. So those are available to us. And then when we get down to the reporting side of it, it can help us from a risk qualification, real-time exception reporting back to management, and even get into root cause analysis, root cause investigation. The competitive landscape, it strengthens our capabilities. It helps us seek new talent, and increase value, those deeper discussions on issues such as cost recovery. Talent development, it helps us from a recruiting standpoint, strengthens our business skills, and actually appeals to other staff members, including other employees, professionals that we have in our organization. And then from a business partnership, those transition skills to the rest of the business. Many times what we'll find is that if internal audit starts a data analytics function and they do it independently, they may end up becoming an enterprise effort. Or if there is an enterprise effort out there, it helps internal audit to partner with them. Pass this on. I think this is you, Lawrence.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So here, it's important to note, as with any function, data analytics consists of and is influenced by people, process, and technology. And I'll venture to say that although this may be counterintuitive, people are the most important aspect of a successful data analytics program. The top barrier for any implementation of an analytics program is having inadequate resources from a volume standpoint or inadequate skills. So it really takes a diverse group of people, people who understand risk and risk management, people who understand processes, people understand data and technology and analytic tools, it really is as much of an art as it is a science. I mean, you're really only limited by the ideas for analytics that you have and the reliability of your data. So there is a real strong element of creativity as you're contemplating this. There's nothing yet that replaces the people aspect of being creative and applying that creativity to processes and technology. So, it's interesting. We are familiar with, or will become familiar with, the terms data scientists and data engineers, data analytics or analysts, but I'm working on coining the term data dreamers, right? So you heard it here first, feel free to use it, but just give me credit. We need someone who can explore the vast realms of analytics, someone who's going to ask the question, well, what if we, or can we do this? Pushing those boundaries and seeing if our engineers and data scientists can kind of bring those ideas to life. So once again, data dreamers, we're going to start using that term in this part of our industry. So in all seriousness, we need to know and define who is going to be responsible for, creating the analytics, who's going to run the scripts, who's going to maintain our analytics. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we progress through our slides, but people, once again, very, very important aspect of having a successful program. From a process standpoint, it's also important that we look at this from two perspectives. There are two types of processes that need to be considered as we're evaluating and working on standing up an analytics program for our internal audit function. The first one we have to consider are the audit processes themselves. Which of those processes can be re-engineered or replaced through the use of analytics? Generically, is it our planning process? Could it be our testing or reporting process? Even our program management or budgeting processes may be helped through some type of analytics, right? So how would these processes be modified and enhanced and made more efficient through the use of analytics? That's a critical question that we have to ask. The other process we have to consider are those ones that we're most familiar with. Those are the auditable processes. Does AP, accounts payable, lend itself to doing something with that analytics, or receivables, sales, inventory? And the answer to that is yes. But we have to explore how that is, how that's happening, and how we can enhance our current audit processes, our testing. Through the evaluation of and the use of analytics in those auditable processes. Okay, so like I said, we will continue to explore how we do this as we progress, and then technology speaks for itself. We will need the proper tools, access to those tools, access to the data. Technology is still foundational to this, but once again, I'll say it again, it's only as good as the people that we have working through this. Okay? We can advance the slide. So there is a series of questions that we have to ask when we're considering implementing an effective data analytics program for our internal audit function. Some of these we've touched upon already, but let's take a look at some of those we haven't. Do we have the people in place? We've been talking about that. Do we have the right skill sets? That's all very, very intuitive. We know that. The real question that has to be asked a lot of times at the front is, do we have the right tools or access to those tools? Do we have the budget to do this? Have we thought about how much this is going to take from a monetary standpoint? Can you obtain the data needed? It's one thing having ideas about what we want to analyze, but the portability of that data, the access, our ability to access that data is key, right? Is the volume manageable? Does management support the use of analytics? Do we have buy-in from the top down? And then do the forecasted costs outweigh the benefits? These are very commonsensical questions, but if we answer no to any of these, we still have some work to do in preparation for the implementation of an effective data analytics program. So, but these are just some questions to consider as we're planning and evaluating our readiness for that program. Okay, we can advance. All right, so data analytics as a function. As with any initiative, there needs to be a well-defined implementation, execution, and program management process in order to achieve, the results that we want. And a lot of these elements of the process should be something we're familiar with. They're things that we evaluate through our audits or things that we apply as we execute our own programs. So we should really be focused on using the same project and risk management protocols that we expect from our auditees for initiatives and implementations that they're going through. At the very beginning, we have to develop a strategy. What is the scope of analytics that we're comfortable with? What's our approach going to be? Are we going to do it all at once, or are we going to do it incrementally? Who are the stakeholders within our department and outside of our department that we need to pull into this process? And then really, what is it that we want to achieve? Are we trying to expand our risk coverage, or are we trying to reduce our costs and drive our efficiencies? Defining those things will be key. And then there should always be some performance metrics. How are we going to grade ourselves through quantitative or qualitative data that determines whether or not we're meeting our objectives and meeting expectations. A governance structure is important. And that's why that word is prominent there in the clouds in our graphic. We have to have an understanding as to who is going to own this program, who's going to be accountable for the performance. What are the critical tasks that will support and undergird the program itself? What are the roles and responsibilities? All of that has to be well defined. Once again, as we would do it with any initiative or project. The steady state activities should include having an understanding of change management protocols, who is going to be authorized to make adjustments to our analytics. Data validation is something we'll talk a lot about. It's a critical task, making sure we have clean, reliable data to support our evaluation. Access controls. Who should be running our tools, and once again, who has access to make modifications to them. Data security needs, that's always a source of potential risk that needs to be thought through and managed. Maintenance, documentation, these are all things that have to be considered and defined upfront as we're doing our planning and setting up our data analytics function. Right. But a couple of other things that often get forgotten about. How should this be reflected in our audit manual? Do we need an additional section of our audit manual that defines and prescribes how we're to be using analytics? Or does it prompt a change to our charter? Are we asking for and doing something different? From a governance standpoint, from a holistic standpoint, that warrants some adjustments in our charter. So from the beginning to the end, we really need to kind of think through the people, processes, and technology that may be impacted by the process that we're implementing through data analytics. Okay, we can continue. The next slide. So analytics requires a variety of different technology working together. That's something that we know and we have experienced. The tools need to be defined, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the common tools that we are familiar with and that we use and we've seen successfully used at our clients. Where's the data going to be stored? Where's data stored currently? Do we have access to those storage tools? Where will we store our data as we're evaluating it? Where will that data be maintained? What's our capacity? Where will we need additional servers? Will we need some on-site or off-site expansion of our capabilities, our storage capabilities? Should we contemplate storing something in the cloud? Now we're getting kind of nuanced and into some of the details, but these are things that are important to evaluate and keep top of mind as we're doing our planning. And then data mobility and encryption. We want to make sure that we're constantly, regardless of what we do, we're protecting the data that we're retrieving, that we're analyzing, and that we're storing. So mobility, encryption will require a fair amount of control and rigor depending on the sensitivity of the data that we're evaluating. Yeah. Let's continue. I think we're going to turn it over to Jay to talk a little bit, as I promised, about some of the data analytic tools.
Great, thank you, Lauren. So as Lauren said, there are a number of tools, and they range from very, I don't want to call them simple, but more accessible to some of the more specialized tools. So as we move from left to right, you have the basic desktop type tools. Think about Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Access. They're very easy to use. A lot of us use these in our everyday life. They tend to be very cost effective. They tend to come with the computers these days, or at least they're easy to buy a license to. But unfortunately, there are certain space and memory constraints. There's also some control and security issues. So if you think about a large data analytics project that is analyzing 10, 20, 50 million lines, that's probably not an ideal use of Microsoft Excel. And you will probably spend more of your time rebooting your computer than you will actually doing any analysis. So from there, we go into some of the integrated query tools, some of the big tools like PeopleSoft, Oracle, JDE, SAP. What's great about these? They're dynamic. They have multiple uses. They're very powerful, but they do take a while to stand up, and they at times can be cost prohibitive depending on the size of your organization. From there, you go to specialty report writers like a Cognos or Business Objects, and the pros are they're compatible with just about anything. They're rather cost effective, they're easy to navigate, and they're very user friendly. But a lot of times they have poor visualization capabilities, which means then you have to strap on an additional tool really to get the functionality of it where you need it. So next we go into programming language. Now, this really is more of the IT set. And when you think about this, think of those languages that are most used in data analytics. It might be SQL, it might be Python, it might be R. They're very versatile. It's a very standardized language. It's very portable, but it is a specialized skill set, and at times can have a complex interface. And once again, a lot of times you need something else to help get the results out and visualize it for the understanding of a broader audience. From there, we go over to a specialized auditing software. Think about Galvanize, used to be known as ACL. And these tools are very easy to use, but they are specialty tools. And so the SOX compliance interface is lacking at times. So although they're powerful, I don't want to call them one-hit wonders, but they tend to have a special need and a special application. And then from there, you go into, say, one of the tools that I suggested to tack on to any of these others. You have specialized data analytics visualization tools. So think about ClickView or think about Tableau. And what these are, these are fantastic. They have great visualizations. They have the ability to marry data in very easy to use ways. However, sometimes they can be higher cost, and at times they have security issues that have yet to be fixed. Now, my caveat to all of these is, right, I can find individuals who can use these to get a great data analytics project out of just about any of these, but this is a kind of a general look as to what the technology and where the tools lie these days. Next slide, please.
Okay, so let's take a look at a typical data analytics approach. These are some detailed phases, and it's about planning and scoping, the obtain and validate the data, and perform analysis and interpret and report the results. You see the large green area there. That is the obtain and validate data. And I think the consensus is about close to 80% of your time is going to be spent on obtaining and validating the data. And that's where a lot of data analytics projects get off the rails and have some issues because there's not enough time devoted or planned for the obtaining and validating the data. So let's take a little closer look at each of these phases. So let's start with the planning and scoping side. So here you're wanting to define the objective of the analytic. So determine the approach. And so in doing this, what are you expecting the analytic to tell us? What business problem are we trying to solve? Are we looking at accounts payable and we think that there may be duplicate invoices that have been paid? Are we looking for something that's more systemic, maybe some fraud that's involved? But what business problem are we trying to solve here? And what is going to be the approach with the data owners, the IT department? And then what about systems? Is there just one system, one database that we're going to have to look at? Or are there multiple databases? Is there some disparate systems, databases that we're going to have to look at? And then the planning and prioritizing of those documents and tests. Relative to that, what tables within the systems, if we look at this, contain the information, sometimes those naming of those fields and things like that, we run into issues with that. The fields that are named in the user interface is different than what the IT department's going to be looking at. So this planning and scoping is really important. Key deliverables is what is the requirements document and a list of the data sources and expected outputs, and a resource plan, and what are our timelines, making sure that you allocate enough time to obtaining and validating the data and estimate that effort. As we go on to the obtain and validate the data, again, about 80% of your effort's going to be in this area. And the objective is to obtain the data necessary to actually achieve the audit objective. So we want to determine the request for the required data. Some questions that we're going to be asking here is, how are we going to determine if the analytic is accurate? So are we getting to the right data? How will you determine if the analytic includes all the data sources? So again, are we looking at one database, one data source, or are we looking at disparate systems and applications that may contain that data? And at what points in the analytic can the results actually be validated? And who's going to do that validation and everything? So you're trying to identify any gaps that are required, and you may end up with a fairly major data cleansing project that has to be done before you can actually obtain that data. Key deliverables here. We want to formalize the data request, verification of it, and a list of identified gaps in the data before we get started. And then we go to the next phase, which is the perform the analysis. And the objective here is using the standard tools, perform the analysis consistent with the analytic objectives. Again, the tools that Jay just talked about or some options that may be available to us. We want to finalize the analysis approach and develop our test scripts and queries and execute those test scripts. So what are the input parameters that are going to be needed, and what is the format of that output as it comes into that tool? And then we're going to interpret and analyze the results. So key deliverables, we're looking at a documented test scripts and that detailed analysis of the data sets and the outputs. And then finally, after all this effort, we actually get to interpreting and reporting the results. So here we're wanting to actually come to a point that what are the results telling us, and who's going to receive those results? Is this the audit committee, executive management team, a business unit leader, and what will be the actions that will fall out of that? One of the things that come out of this quite often, and we see it over and over again, is after we've done everything good, we get to interpret and report the results, and maybe we interpret the results wrong. Or when we get ready to do the reporting, we don't have the communication skills to put together a good PowerPoint presentation with charts and tables. And we end up basically hurting ourselves in the sense that we aren't able to communicate what we really know back to the management team. So this is kind of a detailed phase of data analytics approach. I think we're going to go to the first polling question.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. So our first polling question here is, what questions should be asked in assessing the quality of data? Is there duplication? Is the data standardized? Is the data complete, consistent, and accurate? Or all of the above?
Yep. This is an area that often trips organizations up. So, you know, the level of time it takes, the importance of making sure that data is good is critical.
To your point,
Absolutely. People believe, did I give everyone the answer? Looks like everybody got it right. Good.
Okay, so let's go on to the key roles and responsibilities. So we're going to have an internal audit team. We're going to have potentially inside business partners, or we will have inside business partners. And then we're going to have outside business partners. So the internal audit team, you're going to have your chief audit executive, the head of internal audit group, directors, IT, engagement managers, your internal audit staff. You may have IT auditors involved. You may need a data specialist, and then data analytics SME. And we'll talk a little bit about each one of these responsibilities here. Inside your business partners, you have your C-suite, senior level sponsors, business process owners. You may be dealing with your IT management, CIO, CISO, any number of individuals in that group, business intelligence team, and risk management compliance. And outside the organization, third-party software alliances and third-party data analytics service providers. And then you always have the resources from the IA and ASACA. Okay, let's take a look here. So a little bit deeper dive into some of these, the audit management staff. So they're going to provide a comprehensive understanding of the audit objectives, as we talked about in the audit and the approach for data analytics, identifying those opportunities to introduce data analytics into the internal audit process, and driving the demand through personal insights and relationships. So keep the focus on solving the audit related issues. We talked about having a data analytics SME, subject matter expert. And this is proficient in the use of the data analytic tools and able to design queries and scripts. Too bad we don't know how to spell scripts and manipulate data easily. May have knowledge of advanced statistical topics and modeling and excellent problem solving skills. So the SME is going to be extremely, absolutely essential in performing the data analytics. They're going to understand those tools that are being utilized. And we talked about the data specialist, strong programming and coding proficiency, and database administrator. They're really good at basically facilitating working between the IT group and the business itself, and working with the internal audit group. Expertise in core IT related functions as far as querying, data extraction, cleansing, manipulation. So you're going to see all of these individuals, these professionals are going to be involved relative to data analytics within the internal audit group.
Okay. All right, so it begs the question, well, where is internal audit currently using data analytics? And what we're looking at here is something I call the internal audit data analytics comfort zone. These are common areas where either through our support of our clients, through formal or informal queries, these are the areas where analytics is applied most often. And let's take a look at these. If we have, accounts payable, if we look at accounts receivable, payroll, accounting, finance, IT, compliance, a lot of these areas have a common attribute. A lot of the activities are transactional. The testing in these areas are often based upon the selection of a sample and the drawing of inferences and conclusions from that sample. A lot of times there are multiple systems, multiple data points, things that are kind of laborious or require a heavy lifting from a manual testing standpoint. So all of these areas lend themselves to using data analytics in order to, once again, broaden the scope of your evaluation. Maybe you can do a test of 100% of the sample. Or you can do some additional comparisons and draw some broader conclusions. What's most important is that we're evaluating these areas and finding new potential areas of risk or trends of issues that can be addressed either through training or through adding rigor to existing controls or adding new controls. So it's one thing. If we go in and we test a sample and we're finding one-off exceptions, like someone forgot to sign something or something wasn't removed or moved from one system to another in a timely manner, Those are all good. We'll, as auditors, always find those things and respond to them, but it's certainly much more powerful if we're using analytics and looking at things more holistically, drawing broader comparisons, and strengthening the conclusions that we're coming up with. We always, as auditors, are charged with the responsibility of finding ways to add value to the organization. I would argue that the use of analytics, especially in these areas, affords audit the opportunity to really lend more value and insight to management as a whole, as far as process effectiveness and risk management. So the other thing though I'll say, this is a comfort zone, but really as internal audit professionals, we should be looking for ways to expand this comfort zone. These are easy, low-hanging areas that we can use analytics, but once again, I believe that we're only limited to our ideas. Where can we push the boundaries? What other areas can we evaluate and apply analytics on in order to, broaden our reach and increase our efficiency as auditors? So let's take a closer look at one of these. If you don't mind advancing to the next slide. Accounts payable. This is once again one of the processes in our comfort zone. Some of the things we would look for broadly is for improper payments or questionable disbursements. Anytime money is going out of the door, there's a risk to the organization. So we have historically used analytics to identify multiple payments to the same vendor, for the same amount or same attributes. We tend to use it to look for trends or exceptions in the payments that are made. We can stratify balances. We can look at check amounts and invoice amounts, and once again draw broad conclusions based upon trends that we see. We can calculate and validate unit price changes to make sure that they're substantiated. We can look at check numbers for gaps, payments that didn't have discounts. There are a lot of different things. These things are mature. Data analytics processes around these particular activities using accounts payable. These are mature activities. This isn't anything that's new. For those organizations who are using analytics, they're probably doing some of these things. However, what's changing is the level of sophistication. It's evolving quickly. Well, we may continue to use analytics in accounts payable, but how are we using it differently? How are we leveraging and expounding on our ideas and expounding on technology to do more in the accounts payable space? So during a recent data analytics-based review of AP transactions that I participated in, we had an evaluation of vendor addresses to local zoning maps. And through that, we discovered that there were vendor payments that were being made to companies within a residential zone. And it just prompted us to take a deeper look. Nothing came out of it, but it just demonstrated the expanse of our approach and looking at things differently. It did prompt us to make sure that there was additional rigor taken in setting up new vendors and challenging those vendors, not just based upon the standard things that we look for in vendors, but let's take a look at where they're doing business and does that make sense? The other thing that we worked on was a comparison of vendors to Google Maps. So we looked at where vendor addresses were in our database. We compared that, ran them by pictures of properties in Google Maps. And that one, we discovered that there were a couple of payments being made going to a fictitious vendor that had checks being directed to a retirement home. And then there was also another set of checks that were being sent to an empty property, right? And it was a combination of looking at the vendor information, looking at the Google Maps information, and seeing what didn't make sense and kicking the tires on those things. So a lot of times analytics may not point explicitly to an issue, but it'll lead you to a path where something needs to be addressed and changed. We've also evaluated, say, employee locations where they're swiping their cards. We're looking at and comparing, where they are based upon where they're swiping their cards to where they're charging expenses. And if something doesn't add up, once again, we're exploring it further. The real question is, as we find these potential exceptions is, all right, what happened? What controls need to be put in place or didn't operate effectively? And then how do we prevent this? We can also, with some of these, quantify the corrective actions and recover some funds. That's always great. But most important thing to do is kind of stop the gaps and stop the bleeding and prevent issues from happening going forward. And a lot of times using analytics lends itself to doing just that. You can take a look at the next slide. That brings us to our second polling question.
Excellent. Thank you, Lawrence. So as we launch our second polling question here. All right. So our second polling question reads, what has been or will be your biggest barrier to a successful data analytics program? People and skill sets, uncertainty on best tools and technology, access to quality data, management support, or the last option, any other?
I think in my earlier comments, I rendered at least my opinion as to what I think is the biggest barrier, but we see different types of challenges in every organization that we go in. So it's certainly interesting for us to keep an eye on what new trends may be forthcoming, new problems or issues that may be forthcoming as organizations are implementing or expounding on their current data analytics program. So I'm certainly interested in seeing the results of this. Jeff, you can appreciate that answer, right? Access to quality data. As we've hinted to a lot, getting clean, reliable data is often where we encourage a fair amount of time to be spent. It's often a source of risk and disruption for analytic programs.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, let's talk a little bit about an implementation and maturity model. So we talk to a lot of organizations who are doing analytics on a limited basis. A lot of organizations are contemplating analytics where they've been charged with the responsibility of rolling out a program. But the fact of the matter is a lot of organizations simply don't know how to approach this. They don't know where to start. They don't know how to grow their current program. And make their program optimal, meaning have it produce the results that are expected and do so efficiently. So what we have developed and what we've used with many of our clients is what we call an implementation and maturity model. So, like I said, a lot of times, just organizations don't know where to start. So what this model does is allows internal audit to strategically implement what we would consider a progressive data analytics program, while maintaining control and dictating what the scope of the program will be. You can manage the timing, you can manage your spend, you can manage your level of effort, and do so at a pace that's comfortable for you. So it considers core audit activities, it considers timing, and it considers tools. And we know, as we've been talking about, people is an inherent element of this. So let's just take a look at some of these elements. So at the very top, and what we suggest and prescribe is starting with planning. Let's look at how we could use analytics to support maybe some of the sampling that we do, or to support the risk assessment, or to validate and substantiate some of the test support that we'll use downstream in some of the process level testing. Let's give ourselves 3 to 6 months to do some planning. And a lot of times for this, we can use some of the tools that we already have access to. Excel, we talked about ACL already, Access. So we might be able to begin to set up some of our initial analytic programs with some of the tools that we have and some of the activities that we're already doing. And hopefully in that kind of delve into it and gain some efficiencies, maybe change our point of view and broaden the effectiveness of what we're doing with some of our planning activities. Once we do that and kind of work out the kinks, then we can progress. Well, let's look at some of the basic areas of testing that may lend itself to doing analytics. Vendor spend, looking at GLs and journal entries, time and expenses. These are other areas that we kind of pointed to earlier in our comfort zone. Well, how can we leverage some of the information and data in these processes to do comparisons and to do analytics, and to either supplement our current testing or to replace our current testing, drawing some inferences, identifying some conclusions that point to opportunities for recovery, especially in the vendor spend area, correcting our journal entries, eliminating, the misappropriation of time and misappropriation of money through mistakes and expenses. Here's where we may need to get a little bit more sophisticated and use different tools. We could always use Excel and ACL to do some of this, but if we're really, want to be serious and we think we're going to build out, some more sophisticated tools, here's where we may consider using SAS or SQL or some visualization tools like Tableau and some of the others. So in the premise is, all right, once you can be effective in using analytics to do some of the testing, you can continue to build on those protocols and expand the scope. You may look for other processes, payments, payroll and benefits, logical access, billing and collection, and so on. As you can see, as we work our way through the pyramid, what we're doing is broadening the scope of our testing through analytics. But here's really where we want to get to. The bottom is probably the most important. If we're using analytics to support our testing and to draw conclusions and to identify issues, that's great. It's great for audit, but what we encourage and what we promote is turning over some of those tools. Those tests that we do in audit using analytics equate to monitoring level controls in the business. So as we progress through this maturity model, our end goal is to develop sound, efficient analytic tests through our tools, but push that to the business. Give that to them so they can perform that testing, so they can use the analytics, so they can identify their own issues. And then as audit, we can go in, confirm that they're running those analytics properly, confirm that they're responding to issues that are coming out of the analytics, and leverage the monitor, as I said, the monitoring controls that are now, born out of audit, but being utilized by the business. This is an ideal situation, right? And this is what we promote and push and utilize as we're working with internal audit functions to implement a data analytics program. So it's very progressive, and all of this is interchangeable, right? Every organization is different. There might be some different planning activities at the top. There might be some different, more sophisticated elective testing at the bottom. But this allows for the modeling of an implementation plan, and it sets forth and defines, how we would progress through that plan. Okay. Brings us to best practices. I think Jeff is going to walk us through some of the things that we've seen work well.
Thanks, Lawrence. So we've touched on all this, and we're just this is kind of a summary or review of best practices. We want to achieve success, and the first is setting the objectives, determining what your objectives are with data analytics, both short-term and long-term, and establishing consensus. So you're wanting sponsorship from your executive management team, your C-suite, and you want to establish that consensus. So make sure that they understand what your objective is, again, short-term and long-term. The second is establishing that governance framework around change management. So ensuring that you have structure around it. Who's approved change scripts, queries, so that change management process relative to that. The validation of the data, access to the data. We talked about that. PII information, things that have to be secured. So your access and data security to that data is very important, not only when you obtain it, but how you retain that data once you have it. Is that data going to be encrypted when it comes to you? Is it going to be scrubbed in some way? Is that data returned? Do you have direct access to the database itself? Or is that information, again, going to be segregated, pulled out, and sent to you in some stripped down format? Documentation. So documentation and maintenance of your scripts. How do you keep that? How do you maintain it? Those are really important. So that governance framework, as we have indicated, is one of the success factors. And then measuring success, cost versus benefit ratios. So the KPIs, what are we returning? It doesn't always have to be in the sense of monies that we're finding, such as something as simple as Lawrence has talked about and Jay, and that is where you have a recovery because you've had duplicate payments or something like that. But there's a cost benefit ratio that's based on things such as preventing the company from losing money. It's before they even lose money. So finding systemic issues and things like that. We talked about asset recovery, reducing fines from a regulatory compliance standpoint. Again, being more proactive than reactive. And then increased labor efficiency. So you're taking your internal audit group, and instead of doing sampling, they can look at the entire universe, the entire data set itself. You're going to get better ideas relative to any issues that are out there by not having to just do sampling. And it's going to pull all that information and put it into a format that you can make some decisions and report back to not only your internal audit team, but to your management team. Let's look at the last few of the best practices. So small pilot projects. Before you dive into it, if you're not already doing data analytics, start with a small pilot project, deliberately small. Lawrence talked about comfort zone. So take something that you're comfortable with. Again, something as simple as duplicate payments or invoices that are missing PO numbers, something like that. Do a period of testing, measuring stats and processing metrics. Take on low-hanging fruit. Time and expenses. I mean, those are a good way. P cards. I mean, there's low-hanging fruit, small projects that you can take on to begin to prove what you can do from a data analytics standpoint. Number 5, we talked about this. This is going to be the big thing that you're going to deal with, and that is clean up and reconcile the data prior to automating, prior to doing the data analytics. That is going to be a disproportionate amount of your time, and your effort should be planned there. And then the tools. So log procedures performed on the data. Allow users to easily rerun the analysis with minor changes. So make sure that the scripts are saved and maintained appropriately. Scalable in regards to the platform. So again, Jay talked about some of the limitations with Access and Excel. So make sure that the data you're going to be looking at is not going to basically be too much for the platform you're trying to utilize. Ensure the vendor's vision is aligned. So if you're using a particular vendor, whether it's an outsourced vendor or whether it's a tool that you have acquired, make sure that that vendor that is providing that tool, make sure that their vision is aligned with where you want to go from your objective standpoint. And you're going to need to include training and support with your internal audit team. And you may need to do training and support relative to the interaction with the IT group and with the business. That will also be important from a perspective of how you implement and build success with data analytics. I think we're going to the next polling question.
Excellent. So as we go into the third polling question here, does your organization audit the integrity of data analytic tools used in business operations? We've got yes, no, no, but planning to do so in near future, or D, not sure.
And I know in certain industries, this is probably more prominent or relevant. Like, for example, banking is required to evaluate those significant models that are used. Those are often data analytics, can be defined as data analytic models. But this is also becoming more and more. You know, we see tools like Power BI, I think there was a question about that, being used in financial planning and analysis. A lot of that is driving operational and financial decisions. So it's a growing area of risk because analytics are being used more frequently and more prominently. So it's going to be, if not already, on the scope of internal audits plan.
some mixed
So that's good.
mixed results here. What, 33% yes, 20% no. They're not planning to do so. Is it 18 and another 30% are not sure. So, okay.
It's present. It's evolving. So I think that concludes the oh, I'm sorry, Jeff, please. I'm getting ahead of myself.
That's okay. This is more for information purposes, and you can retain a copy of the presentation. So we're not going to go over each one of these, but these are resources both from the IA and other guidance with IPPF and GTAG. So if you want to get some of the resources and guidance that is provided by the professional association, this may be helpful also in building your objectives and exactly where you want to go from a data analytics standpoint, and what you should be considering relative to those processes and everything. So I think that basically concludes our presentation today.
There was a really quickly, I think we have a minute left. There was a question, any question that was submitted, we really want to answer them. We'll make a concerted effort to do so. There was a question about coordinating internal audit and compliance's use of data analytics. That's a topic that's of interest to me, and I would love to explore that with whomever asked that question. There is some merit to it. It's considered one of the other common or leading practices, and can be done without forfeiting any independence. So hopefully we can get the opportunity to explore that and talk about that a little bit further. But we appreciate everyone's participation and attendance, not in just this event, but our entire event, right? So hopefully you found it to be edifying, and you got some good information and some good CPs from it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And this does conclude, as you mentioned, the last of the digital event webinars of the digital event series here for Jefferson Wells. We appreciate that you joined us today, as well as for many other sessions. We've seen multiple joining, so we appreciate that. And thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.